A pastor betrays his congregation's trust, but his lies destroy his reputation. The town of Marwood had always prided itself on being a place where faith and family bound people together. At the heart of this unity stood Reverend Elias Moore, a man whose voice could melt stone hearts and whose prayers seemed to touch heaven itself. To the congregation, he was more than a pastor. He was a shepherd guiding lost souls, a man whose wisdom radiated purity, yet behind his angelic tone and perfectly rehearsed sermons, Elias harbored secrets that could corrode even the strongest pillars of trust. He had perfected the art of appearances, his white collar pressed, his Bible worn at the edges, and his words always laced with conviction. Mothers adored him, fathers respected him, and children stared at him in awe. They believed he lived exactly as he preached, humbly, righteously, and devotedly. But to Elias, the pulpit was not only a platform for faith, it was a stage for power. Little did the congregation know, beneath the gleaming facade he hid indulgences and deceptions that contradicted every verse he thundered from the altar, and the stage he stood on would soon crumble, revealing the man behind the mask. Elias had not always been a man of the cloth. In his youth he was a gifted speaker with an uncanny ability to sway crowds. He discovered early on that people longed to believe in something greater than themselves, and he learned to use that longing as a tool. A chance invitation to deliver a small devotional at a local gathering revealed to him the intoxicating effect of authority cloaked in holiness. The applause, the tears, and the reverence became an addiction stronger than any earthly vice. Over the years, Elias studied not just theology but psychology. He learned when to pause in a sermon to stir emotions, how to lace his words with promises that echoed the desires of his listeners. With charm and cunning he built his following, slowly weaving a reputation as the voice of Marwood. He spoke of sacrifice and integrity, though his own heart was tethered to ambition and greed. The more the congregation trusted him, the bolder he became. Donations flowed in, not just as coins but as sacrifices of faith, and Elias collected them like trophies. To outsiders he was untouchable, but those closest to him had begun noticing cracks in the shining armor of his faith. It began quietly, like a faint whisper carried by the wind. Some of the elders noticed the accounts did not balance as neatly as they should. Offerings seemed to vanish into obscure charity projects that never bore fruit. A widow who had donated her savings to the church never received the help she was promised. When questions arose, Elias responded with eloquent explanations, each more convincing than the last. His smile disarmed suspicion, his prayers silenced protest. But doubt is a seed, and once planted it grows. Whispers began circulating after service. Why did the pastor wear tailored suits when he preached simplicity? Why did his car shine newer with each passing season while the church roof leaked with every storm? A young deacon named Samuel, devoted and sincere, began piecing together inconsistencies. His admiration for Elias clashed with the unease growing in his heart. Could the man he idolized truly be living a double life? Samuel resolved to watch more carefully, never realizing the dangers that came with uncovering the truth. Elias, confident in his ability to deceive, ignored the murmurs. But the foundation of his empire of lies had begun to tremble. Behind locked doors and heavy curtains, Elias's world looked starkly different. In a private room above the rectory, liquor bottles lined his shelves, their golden contents betraying his preached sermons on temperance. Expensive watches and trinkets, far beyond a pastor's means, filled his drawers. The man who thundered against worldly temptations had quietly surrendered to them all. Nights once dedicated to prayer turned into evenings of indulgence. Elias rationalized his behavior with twisted logic. Hadn't he given so much of himself to the church? Didn't he deserve comfort and reward? In his mind, sin cloaked itself in justification. But secrecy is fragile. A local shopkeeper, delivering supplies, glimpsed the shelves of bottles and the stack of unopened packages. Though Elias laughed it off as gifts from grateful congregants, doubt lingered. Meanwhile, Samuel, sensing something was amiss, started keeping records of donations and expenses, comparing them against Elias's public claims. The numbers whispered of betrayal, and Samuel knew the truth would not remain hidden forever. The mask Elias wore was slipping, even if he did not yet realize it. As Elias grew more comfortable in his duplicity, the congregation unknowingly armed themselves with evidence. Each promise he failed to keep, each explanation that stretched too thin, wove a web around him. Members who once adored him now watched with guarded eyes. The more he preached against greed and dishonesty, the more his hypocrisy bled through the cracks. Samuel confided his suspicions to Miriam, an elder who had known Elias since his early days. She was reluctant at first, unwilling to tarnish the image of a man she had once admired. But when Samuel presented her with records, columns of figures that proved money had been siphoned, her heart sank. Together, they realized the deception was not a matter of mistake but a deliberate betrayal. The two began gathering testimonies quietly, speaking with those who had been wronged. Each story painted Elias as a man who wielded faith like a weapon, using scripture as a shield for his own corruption. Unaware of the storm building around him, Elias planned his most ambitious sermon yet, a spectacle to reaffirm his control. He intended it to be his greatest performance. Instead, it would mark the beginning of his downfall. The sanctuary buzzed with anticipation that Sunday. Word had spread that Reverend Elias Moore was preparing a message unlike any other, one that would awaken the spirit of Marwood. Families filled the pews early, clutching their Bibles, their eyes fixed on the pulpit draped in crimson cloth. Elias entered with the confidence of a man untouchable, his robe flowing, his voice thundering as though heaven itself spoke through him. He preached about purity, sacrifice, and the dangers of false prophets, his words dripping with irony. His cadence was mesmerizing, his gestures perfectly timed. Tears rolled down cheeks, hands lifted in worship, and hearts surrendered to the illusion. For an hour, Elias was once again the untarnished shepherd, and those who doubted him felt a twinge of guilt. But in the back row, Samuel and Miriam exchanged glances. They had the truth in their possession, and the performance only deepened their resolve. The louder Elias preached about righteousness, the clearer his hypocrisy became. Elias ended with a flourish, declaring the church would embark on a new mission of outreach that required extraordinary generosity. The crowd erupted in applause, unaware that behind his commanding words lay greed. Yet soon the mask would be ripped away in the most public of ways. In the days following the grand sermon, donations poured in. Families gave beyond their means, inspired by Elias's call for sacrifice. The collection plates overflowed, and Elias counted the offerings behind closed doors with a smirk of satisfaction. To him, it was proof of his mastery, proof that no whisper of doubt could topple his control. But Samuel and Miriam pressed forward quietly. They compiled bank statements, tracked missing funds, and documented testimonies from congregants who had been deceived. One widow revealed she had donated her husband's life savings for a promised community shelter that never materialized. Another confessed that Elias pressured her into giving by warning of God's displeasure. The more they uncovered, the heavier their hearts became. It was not merely about stolen money. It was about broken trust, shattered faith, and souls led astray. The hypocrisy stung deeper than the theft. Meanwhile, Elias grew careless. His nights out in neighboring towns became frequent. Rumors spread of his presence in lavish clubs, places where no pastor should be seen. Though many refused to believe it, the whispers reached the ears of those who had once defended him fiercely. The betrayal was no longer hidden in shadows. It had begun to seep into daylight. One evening, Samuel gathered enough courage to confront Elias privately. He entered the pastor's study, a room lined with expensive leather-bound books and framed certificates of theological achievement. Elias greeted him warmly, though his eyes narrowed with suspicion at the young deacon's stern expression. "Pastor," Samuel began, his voice steady though his heart raced, "there are things I cannot ignore. The accounts, the unfulfilled promises, the rumors, they don't align with the word you preach." Elias leaned back in his chair, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Son, you must be cautious. Doubt is the devil's tool. Numbers can be misread, rumors twisted. Do you dare accuse your shepherd without proof?" Samuel laid a folder on the desk, filled with evidence. Elias's expression flickered, only for a moment before hardening into defiance. He pushed the folder aside and leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "Be careful, boy. Destroying a man of God is not just rebellion, it is blasphemy." Samuel walked out shaken but resolute. He knew Elias would not repent willingly. The confrontation confirmed his suspicions. Elias was not only guilty but unrepentant, ready to weaponize faith itself against anyone who threatened his throne. The battle lines had been drawn. News travels fast in small towns, and Marwood was no exception. Elias sensed resistance growing, but dismissed it as envy from those who wished to see him fail. Yet beneath the surface, momentum was building against him. Samuel and Miriam, now joined by others, formed a quiet coalition determined to reveal the truth. They met in living rooms after dark, whispering over documents and testimonies. Each new discovery added fuel to their cause. Extravagant purchases under Elias's name, trips funded by offerings, and even letters of manipulation sent to vulnerable congregants. The hypocrisy was undeniable, but they knew exposing him too soon would only backfire. Elias's charm was still potent, and his pulpit still powerful. Meanwhile, Elias doubled down in his sermons, denouncing enemies of the church and warning his flock against wolves in sheep's clothing. Ironically, every word he spoke described himself. Though the congregation remained blind, the tension in Marwood grew unbearable. Families divided, some defending Elias, others whispering doubts. Trust cracked like dry earth before a storm. Samuel and his allies understood one thing clearly: the truth had to be revealed not in whispers but in thunder. Only then would the congregation see Elias for who he truly was. The turning point came when a photograph surfaced. A traveler passing through a neighboring city had captured Elias exiting an upscale club, his arm around a woman who was not his wife, his clerical collar loosened and his eyes glazed with drink. The image spread like wildfire, whispered from neighbor to neighbor, until it reached nearly every household in Marwood. Elias attempted damage control, claiming the photo was a trick of the enemy, but the denial fell flat. Too many details aligned with the rumors already circulating. The congregation, once so quick to defend him, now looked at him with suspicion. For the first time, his words failed to disarm the doubts. On the following Sunday, the pews were only half full. Elias thundered from the pulpit, condemning slander and urging loyalty, but the more he spoke, the hollower his voice sounded. The crack in his armor had widened, and the trust he had taken for granted was slipping away. Samuel and Miriam knew the time was near. They had the documents, the testimonies, and now the undeniable public scandal. All that remained was to bring the truth into the light of day, where no sermon could smother it. The fall of Elias Moore had begun. The first undeniable proof didn't come from a rumor or a photograph. It came from arithmetic. Miriam's nephew, Aaron, a quiet accountant with a talent for patterns, offered to review the church books just to help. He didn't touch a single page without two witnesses present. When he finished cross-referencing deposits, vendor invoices, and bank transfers, his pen hovered over a column and drew a slow final line. Money earmarked for the Hope Shelter had been siphoned through a shell charity and reappeared as payments for luxury items and travel. The ledger didn't accuse, it described. Dates, amounts, signatures, an unbroken trail of numbers that formed the outline of a lie. Samuel felt his stomach knot as Aaron walked them through transactions. There were no sensational flourishes, just arithmetic that ignored charisma. Each figure contradicted a sermon, each signature whispered betrayal. Miriam sat very still, palms folded, face pale. The simplest entry, a transfer made an hour after an offering call for widows, caught in her throat like a thorn. What they held was not circumstantial, it was structural. The sanctuary's beams were strong, but the trust that sustained them had been hollowed out. They made copies, stored in separate homes, sealed in envelopes with dates and witnesses. No one wanted spectacle. They wanted truth in a form that could not be shaken by a tearful apology or a thunderous sermon. When Samuel finally exhaled, he knew the ledger changed everything. Faith could survive disappointment. It could not survive arithmetic that proved a shepherd had feasted on his flock. The coalition decided to act not on Sunday, where Elias commanded atmosphere and rhythm, but on a weeknight members' meeting where questions were allowed and time dragged like a plow through hard soil. Word went out quietly. Attendance encouraged. Stewardship update. The wording was plain by design. Truth did not need drums. As dusk bled into evening, the fellowship hall filled with the weary and the wary, parents carrying faith like a bruised heirloom, elders with pens poised, young adults exchanging looks that admitted fear and resolve in equal measure. Samuel arrived early with a stack of folders, each labeled and numbered. Miriam moved slowly, greeting people she had known since their baptisms, her voice a soft nerve. Aaron set up a modest projector. No theatrics, just spreadsheets. The plan was simple. Present facts invite questions, protect the vulnerable. They prayed, not for triumph, but for clarity. Elias entered late, a calculated stroll, offering smiles that skimmed the surface of the room. He took his seat near the front, flanked by loyalists who watched the coalition with tight jaws. He expected a scolding over rumors and a chance to reclaim the narrative with righteous indignation. He did not expect rows of labeled folders placed into congregants' hands, nor the quiet power of paper against performance. Samuel stood, voice even. Tonight is about stewardship and truth. We will read, then ask, then decide. He did not name the pastor. He did not need to. The ledger would speak, and when numbers preach, even thunder listens. The first slide was a simple timeline. Offerings collected, project commitments announced, expenditures recorded. The second slide layered on bank statements, the lines of deposits and withdrawals mirroring the timeline like shadows. Then came invoices from the Shell charity, addresses that led to rented mailboxes, signatures that matched Elias's with a slant only a patient bookkeeper notices, no commentary, no accusation, just a sequence of doors, each opening to the next. Hands rose slowly. "Where is the shelter?" asked a mother who had pledged her tax return. "Why are these payments tagged as consulting?" an elder read aloud. "Who approved travel listed under retreats that coincided with a weekend of nightlife 2 towns over?" Miriam kept the conversation on rails. One question at a time, paper to verify each point. Aaron answered with dates, not adjectives. Elias requested to speak. He strode to the front, palms open. "Clerical errors," he said. "Delegated tasks mismanaged by overzealous volunteers." His words were velvet, his eyes were steel. But the room had changed. People looked down at their folders, not up at his face. When a widow raised a trembling hand and asked, "Where is the receipt that shows my gift reaching any family?" the silence that followed was not reverence. It was gravity. Samuel did not gloat. He simply turned a page and displayed a transfer occurring less than an hour after that widow's donation. The room inhaled. Faith was not breaking, it was waking. Cornered, Elias reached for the pulpit voice, the one that had rescued him from countless awkward corners. He warned of spiritual warfare, called the investigation a trap for the faithful, and accused the coalition of seeking to crucify a man of God. But as he spoke, his words floated untethered. Facts had cut the ropes. When he pointed at the ledger and called it misinterpreted, Aaron quietly read the bank's own descriptions. When he denounced the photo as a lie, an usher produced additional images from the same night, timestamps intact, faces too familiar to dispute. A young man once mentored by Elias stood and read aloud a letter the pastor had sent him, promising church funds for a program that never existed, urging sacrificial giving in exchange for divine favor. The sentence echoed and fell like a stone into the room's still water. Miriam, voice steady, addressed the pastor not as an enemy but as one who had been entrusted. "We asked for transparency months ago. We were given threats. We asked for receipts. We were given stories. We asked for repentance. We were given applause lines." The breaking wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. A motion was introduced to suspend Elias pending an external audit. Then another motion to remove him from financial authority immediately. Votes were counted by hands that shook. When the tallies were read, the room did not cheer. It exhaled. Elias, pale, looked over a people he no longer commanded and understood that power had returned to its rightful owner, the truth. By morning, the decisions had become headlines, first in group chats, then on local feeds, finally in regional outlets that loved a moral unraveling. The church issued a brief statement. "We are grieving, auditing, and making restitution." It was the correct order. Members who had once guarded their pastor from criticism now guarded one another from despair. Some wept, clutching folders as if they were funerals folded into paper. Others volunteered to call the elderly and explain gently what had happened, replacing spectacle with care. Elias attempted a counter-offensive online, a slick video invoking persecution, legal counsel, and forgiveness for human frailty. But humility cannot be pre-recorded. The comments filled with screenshots of the ledger, testimonies from those pressured to give, and faces once lit by his sermons now lit by a computer's cold blue as they typed, "No more." Sponsors withdrew. Invitations to speak evaporated. An investigation opened, dull, relentless, uninterested in metaphors. Samuel delivered checks back to those most harmed as a first step, the funds drawn from emergency reserves. When a widow received hers, she pressed the envelope back into his hand. "Keep it for the shelter," she whispered. "Build the thing he promised." He shook his head, but she insisted. "Don't let lies be the last word." In that moment, restitution became more than money. It became a vow. The church would not be remembered for a man's fall, but for how it stood back up. Sunday arrived with a pulpit unoccupied and a sanctuary uncertain. No organ swell, no theatrical entrance, just rows of people facing a wooden stand that suddenly looked honest. A lay elder offered a reading, not a blazing prophet, just a psalm about truth and mercy kissing. The absence of a star revealed the choir of the ordinary. Prayers rose from different corners, voices cracked, and no one rushed to smooth the sound. They let the silence work like a poultice on a wound. Children asked plain questions in the fellowship hall. Why did he lie? Parents answered with terms they wished they had learned earlier. Accountability, transparency, forgiveness without forgetting. The nursery volunteers rotated shifts so young couples could sit together and grieve. Nobody pretended to have tidy explanations. They had something sturdier, resolve. Samuel worried for his faith. How do you keep belief when the person who taught it to you proved false? Miriam found him sitting beneath a sycamore on the church lawn. "We aren't called to worship voices," she said softly. "We're called to love truth and neighbor. Everything else is scaffolding." The wind moved through the leaves like pages turning. He realized his doubt wasn't a cliff, it was a doorway. If faith could survive arithmetic and headlines, maybe it would be faith enough to rebuild. The pulpit remained empty that day, and somehow the emptiness preached, God does not need grandstanding to be present. Healing required more than a news sermon. It demanded policy, process, and patient candor. The congregation voted to hire an independent firm to complete the audit and publish the findings in full. They created a finance committee of rotating members with term limits, implemented dual signatures for expenses, and posted monthly statements on a bulletin board and online. Receipts, once afterthoughts, became sacraments of accountability. They also started listening sessions. No microphones, no spotlights, just chairs in a circle and a pot of coffee cooling at the center like a reminder to slow down. People spoke of betrayal, but also of complicity. The way charisma can hush questions, the ease of confusing a gifted performer with a faithful guide. Teens offered to help with digital literacy, teaching elders how to spot manipulation in media. The lessons felt strangely holy. Then came a decision that surprised even the coalition. They would build the shelter, not as a monument to scandal, but as a correction. They formed partnerships with local nonprofits, drew a budget that fit their means, and committed to volunteer hours before raising a single dollar. The first bricks were laid by hands that had voted for removal and by hands that had defended Elias to the end. Mortar doesn't care about prior arguments. It binds what it touches. Repair, they learned, is unglamorous. It is also contagious. What began as a ledger became a blueprint. Months later, Elias reappeared at a small hall he rented for a night of testimony. Flyers promised truth at last. The room filled with curiosity seekers, loyal remnants, and a few who hoped for contrition. He began softly, threading the needle between confession and justification. He admitted to poor stewardship, blamed stress, unnamed advisors, spiritual attack. He asked for empathy. He did not, however, itemize wrongdoing, name victims, or offer restitution. In that omission lay the shape of his heart. A woman stood, voice shaking but clear. "I gave you my rent money because you told me God would multiply it for a shelter. You multiplied it into suits." The room held its breath. Elias blinked, then moved on with his script. Something snapped, not in anger but in attention. People began to rise and leave quietly. The audience had learned what the ledger taught months ago. Specificity is the currency of truth. The next day, his video from the event circulated. It drew sympathy from a few, but most replies were versions of the same sentence. Repentance looks like naming and paying back. Without those verbs, his performance had no verbs to stand on. He had mistaken sentiment for transformation, a common error among those trained to move crowds. Crowds move. Truth remains. By evening, the church released a brief note: "We wish health for every soul, including those who wrong us. Our focus remains on repair." It was not a clapback. It was an orientation. The shelter opened on a wind-bright morning. A simple building with wide windows and a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and second chances. They named it Cedar House, after the tree under which Samuel had almost lost his faith. No plaques with individual names, just a bronze plate that read, "Built by the hands of a community that chose truth." The first guests arrived shyly, carrying bags packed with both clothing and shame. Volunteers met them with warmth that asked for no testimonies in return. Funding came in small bills, coins touted by children, grants won through stubborn applications, and a quiet donation from someone who'd once defended Elias fiercely. "I was wrong," the note said. "Help me be part of right." In the kitchen, Miriam oversaw a rotation of cooks, who understood that soup can hold back the dark for a little while. Aaron trained new treasurers on software that generated reports anyone could read. On opening day, rain threatened then held, as if weather itself respected the occasion. A brief dedication, no spectacle, ended with a line that has since become the town's refrain: "We build the thing he promised, not out of spite but because integrity needed an address." The building wasn't grand, it was honest, and honesty, the congregation discovered, is beautiful in a way frescoes can't capture. It doesn't flake with time. Time smoothed the hard edges without erasing the lesson. Elias faded from headlines into footnotes. An address change here, a rumor there, while Marwood became known less for scandal than for the stubborn grace of its response. The pulpit, once empty, is now shared among teachers who check one another's math as carefully as their theology. Children grow up hearing two refrains at once: "We forgive" and "We verify." No one confuses them anymore. Samuel still feels a catch in his throat when he walks past the ledger framed in the church office, not as a trophy, but as a warning. Miriam waters the potted plant by the window in Cedar House and laughs that the only extravagance they indulge in now is sunlight. The widow who returned her check leads a crafts night, her table crowded with quiet victories. If you ask the town what happened, they won't say, "A pastor fell." They'll say, "A community learned to love the truth more than the voice that carried it." Reputation was not destroyed, it was transferred, from a man to a people. That, in the end, is the real miracle. If this story gripped you, the slow burn mystery, the moral reckoning, the rebuild rooted in hope, subscribe for more original tales of suspense and redemption. Your support helps these stories keep showing up where they're needed most, right in front of you.